Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on who is really controlling Jamaica. Tonight, we want to explore this topic and all of its components. The United States of America has historically had political and economic influence in Jamaica. China has recently invested into Jamaica's infrastructure, as well as giving investment loans and so on. So, Jamaica has not only been influenced by international countries, but have also seen the influence of international organizations. International organizations such as the IMF and the World Bank. These are international organizations that state that they are helping poor countries and its economy to develop and to have a higher standard of living. Well, tonight, myself and my fellow hosts and panelists, we will explore all of these areas and the issues that surround the topic itself. I want to welcome our panelists, my co-panelist, co-host, Claudia Barrett, General Secretary of the UIC, Ms. Carrie Walker, Treasury Secretary of the UIC, Fred Corbing, owner of CSW Engineering and 2000, and of course, the president of the UIC, Mr. Joseph L. Patterson. Welcome, fellow hosts, and welcome everyone to our program. Mr. President, how are you? Mr. Patterson.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Nelson. I didn't realize I was on so soon. But
Right,
no worries. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and
right.
I'll be happy to participate.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, we're going to take a look at the video now, and then we can come back and discuss the topic itself. Are we? Do we have the video? Okay, it seems as if we're not connecting with the video at the moment. Miss Walker. Okay, so until we can have that together, let us hear a little bit from the panelists and so. Fred Corbin, what what is your take on tonight's topic?
Well, thank you very much, Kevin, and I'd like to welcome all of our viewers once again to the UIC TV and the issues that we discuss with truth, knowledge, and education for Jamaica, and the situation as it stands with regard to the question of who controls Jamaica. I think has a historical context going all the way back to the early 1950s, where we look at the way that Jamaica was influenced following its independence its independence from so-called British colonialism. And what we have to realize is that when Jamaica was ceded from so-called British colonial rule to independence governance, what a lot of people in the Caribbean were not aware of, and a lot of Jamaicans were not aware of, was that the territory of Jamaica itself became a corporation registered with the City of London. So when the question is asked today of who controls Jamaica, we have to take that historical context clearly into focus and understand that as a corporation of the City of London, under British colonial rule, by having a Charter of Independence and Westminster Constitutional Authority running that constitution under Admiralty law, The real controllers of Jamaica are the ones with the gold, and the man with the gold makes the rules. So the simple answer to the question of who controls Jamaica is the cabal in charge of the City of London or the Bank of England. The International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, and all the rest of these other non governmental, unelected organizations are only the trimmings around the edge that manipulate Jamaica into what the City of London wants it to do.
Uh, Very interesting take. And it's very interesting that you mentioned about these international organizations being the face. Um, Nevertheless, I think it is significant that that we allow our viewers tonight to understand the role that these organizations play within the framework of Jamaica's economic development. I want to welcome Dr. Michael Harvey as well, longstanding member of the UIT. Dr. Harvey, welcome, welcome. Not sure if you're hearing me, but welcome, Dr. Harvey. Right. Okay, so I'm not sure if we have the video to go as yet. Okay, here it is.
I think. No. Go ahead.
So we're getting ready to play this video. Are we ready? Okay, in the meantime, Mr. President, would you like to chime in on the early phase of the discussion? Yeah, I think you're muted.
My view as to who really controls Jamaica has a number of layers. As we all know, Jamaica was originally a colony of the British, and subsequently in 1838, the Jamaican people, or the people that occupied Jamaica, were told that the slaves were freed or had emancipation. 1834 really, and then they had a 4-year period of apprenticeship into 1838. 100 years after that, the Jamaican people were told that they now have the right to vote, one man, one vote, in 1944. And then subsequent to 1944, we were told 18 years later in 1962 that we now have independence. Throughout this entire period, we've always been under a system of colonialism. So whether it's very direct control by slave masters and the plantocracy into a semi-indirect situation in 1944 called self-governance, to 1962 independence, where we now said we are independent of the British Crown, but we're going to retain the monarch of England as our head of state and have a representative called a Governor General. And we are going to be responsible for ourselves, but still having a relationship with the Crown through the head of state. And that has continued now to today. In that process, if you look at how our politics has evolved, you'd have noticed that every time the indigenous people of Jamaica tried to govern themselves, certain elites stepped in and took control of the situation. So in the 1940s, those elites were the plantocracies here in Jamaica, those who were aligned with the Crown but have business interests here, control most of the estates and plantations, control the economy on a day-to-day basis, and of course, paying homage to the Crown in the process. That evolved into what we have today, known as the PSOJ, the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, and the richest men and women of that group, which really directs the ship on a day-to-day basis in terms of who gets selected, what policies are permitted. Now, there's an overarching factor of those who control the global monetary system. For example, you'll notice that Jamaica does everything possible to stay in the good graces of the IMF and the World Bank and the US and other global players from the EU and, of course, the UK. So the policies we have in Jamaica, whether it's macroeconomic policies or monetary policies or fiscal policies, even social policies, are all directed by our association and affiliation with these bodies at the global level, IMF, World Bank, and the administrations of different countries like the USA, and locally, what is prescribed and allowed by those who fund the two political parties. So I think tonight, as we discuss further, we're going to see how all of these different elements play a role. But at the end of the day, Jamaica is subservient to what I call their colonial masters. And that shift from time to time depending on who is the global leader of the globalist agenda. So America would be a very big player in that, and less and less the UK, because they themselves are now also subservient to those who control the American economy and by extension the global economy.
President Patterson, there's a lot that you mentioned there that we want to develop on, and I just want to see is the video ready as yet? Perhaps you can watch it and then we can come back to that because there's a lot that you said, Mr. Patterson, that we need to unearth there. Just checking if the video is ready. If not, then we can continue the discussion. Okay, so perhaps we can continue. Yeah, Mr. Patterson. So it's. Let me see if the video there. Are we playing it? Yes, Mr. Patterson. You mentioned President Patterson. You mentioned the. It's interesting that you touch upon the historical nature of the IMF in terms of its relationship with Jamaica. I want us to paint a picture to the ordinary Jamaicans out there. You started to mention the idea of, I know you mentioned the PSOJ and all of that, but the idea of these seemingly businessmen and business entities. We kind of want to, I would like to, personally, I'd like to paint a picture of the IMF as a business itself. And we know that this was formed, the IMF was formed in the 1940s. You mentioned the 1940s as well. And tell us, Mr. Patterson, in simple terms, the motive for forming the IMF.
Well, there's the public motive and then there's the hidden motive in anything, right? So if you read what's on paper, the IMF was really brought into being to create a more stable financial environment globally. That's the public, statement. And of course, it's to ensure that we have, effective balance of trade, currency management, not having any major booms and busts in the global economy. But of course, we have been having major booms and busts in the global economy. But the hidden agenda of the IMF, as far as I'm concerned, is really about manipulating and managing the global economy to serve the interest of a few. It's really a form of dictatorship, which is hidden in financial language and banking language. So you have what Miss Dr. Harb would probably call a cabal, phrases like those. And I like to keep it very simple. So at the end of the day, a group of men and women who think that it is their God-given right to control the rest of us have put in place an institution which allows them to centralize the banking system around the world and to be able to manipulate that to give an outsized advantage to a few people and to, by extension, disenfranchise the rest of the world. It also allows them to weaponize the financial sector of the world against those who don't want to play ball the way they want to play it because they control, all of that. Now, the IMF itself is really a lending part of the process. And in this video that I'm seeing Ms. Walker trying to show us here, you'll hear Mr. Manley explain how he views the IMF as a body which really grabs the third world countries by the throat by giving them loans under very restrictive conditions, which oftentimes lead to the country becoming weaker in the process while becoming more and more dependent on the IMF for financing to get out of the hole. But if we're going to understand this properly, we need to understand money and banking without even the names of IMF and so on. Just step back and understand. And if you'll bear with me for a second, I'll just share with you something very fundamental to all of this. If one family lives on an island, one island, just one family is on it, a man, a woman, and they have 3 children, there's no need for government. There's no need for a banking system. They just simply wake up every morning, go pick some coconut, find some food in the bushes, grow something, eat, and just live. The moment you put another family on the island, you now need government. You need governance. You need rules. So the two of them have to decide, how are we going to occupy this island? Which side is yours? Which side is mine? If they have different skills, they have to decide how they're going to trade that. So let's say one is very good at making fishing boats and one is good at making apparel. They have to say, okay, we're going to trade, the use of your boat or your fishing expertise for my clothing. Now multiply that by 10 families, 100 families, 1,000 families, 1,000,000 families. It becomes far more complicated. So after a while, we'll find out that we need some kind of means of exchange. We can do barter, meaning each of us find each other. So I find you, Mr. Nelson, say, listen, I like your accounting skills and you like my trinket making skills, and we trade. But that's very complicated. So we decide to use money in the process. Money now becomes anything that we agree on that's going to allow us to just trade freely among ourselves. Who manages that? If that becomes a spontaneous thing which the people themselves kind of develop and use, no problem. Or you get a middleman in the process called government that decides to manage it. They now are in a position to manipulate the volume of that money and the rate at which that money is loaned, and they can therefore control the economy and exclude who they want to exclude and include who they want to include. And thus government can become a very corrupting influence if it is not designed properly. I'll pause there for now but that is the fundamental. And you're going to take that on a global level now and see how, for some people, it's in their best interest if they can get the laws and regulations of a country and even the world to be so structured that when that plays out, it automatically enriches them and automatically impoverishes the majority. It might just keep them on a minimal level where they earn just enough to continue to be a part of that system and don't fully revolt. Or it becomes so excessive that they revolt and cut off the neck of the king or the queen, like what happened in France.
I like that take on the complexity of human relationships, and just tying that in with the idea of a motive and so forth for the IMF being set up and so on. So from what I'm understanding from some of the things that you say, a global organization with the guise of global economic goodwill, and with that, tying that into the human aspects and the human nature, corruption can arise. And you mentioned also that corruption, it's a word that Jamaicans know all too very well, that corruption can tie into local and national government. So it's going to be the discussion tonight. It should be interesting to see how we clarify that and how we allow the Jamaican people to understand how corruption itself can occur with relationships with international organizations such as the World Bank and the IMF. I'm not sure if we're ready for the video as yet. But in the meantime, Dr. Harvey, you want to chime in? We're not hearing you.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now, guys?
Yes. Yes, we can.
I don't.
And once again, we're not hearing you again. I think you're muted. I think you're muted, Dr. Harvey.
Sakes, what am I going to do? Okay. Right? You got me now.
Right.
You should hear me now, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd gotten muted, but I unmuted. My laptop's giving me a hard time, so let me see if I can get this out, right?
Okay.
There's a name that we need to be aware of. You always need to know the name of the head of the serpent. The name is Rothschild. The Rothschilds set up the UN. They set up the central banking scam that we're talking about tonight, including our BOJ and America's Federal Reserve. Meyer Amschel Rothschild, the patriarch of the Rothschild family, said, "I care not who governs a nation as long as I control its money supply." And this is what we're suffering under. Now, the Rothschilds, you probably know from your study of history, also ran the slave trade. They're responsible for it. And the Rothschilds set up the nation of Israel, which is currently bombing the innocent Palestinians into the Stone Age. This is an evil family. We will never be free as long as they're traversing this earth.
Right. Right.
Mr. Nelson, let me see if I can play the video for you. I'm going to
Okay.
try to play it from my end. Let me try
Thank
here.
you, Mr. Patterson.
No problem. Let me see if I can get this. So here we go. It should be with you momentarily.
To go back to history to understand the International Monetary Fund. It is best to go back to history. We come to 1944. The war is coming near to an end. The Allies were determined not to have the war finish and end up in the mess of the 1930s.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary.
When he spoke about the 1930s, what he's referring to is the crash of the 1929, where, you know, the financial markets crashed in the US, and people were really suffering from severe inflation, food shortages, and all kind of stuff like that. So he's speaking that it's also an outgrowth as well of the Second World War as well, and the implications of that. We continue here.
And financial conference.
The key institution set up was the International Monetary Fund. And the purpose of the fund was to have a bank they could turn to for short-term borrowing to serve the short-term trading interests of the winners of the war.
United States Treasury Secretary Morgenthau heads the American delegation. To be discussed are plans for the stabilization of world currencies.
Same time, they set up the World Bank to provide capital for the rebuilding of Europe. You have to remember what we now know as the Third World didn't exist. There were a few major powers, each of which had a large empire. We had no voice, we had no presence, we just were part of somebody else's power structure. You ask whose interest? Ask the question, who set it up? America found that when they became free, they soon were in every kind of financial problem because they didn't have the economic strength to, shall we say, make it on their own. They needed time to build economies that could then make it in the world. When you see,
can I just interrupt that, Mr. Chair? So the assumption he has made here is that when the former colonies like Jamaica were made free, they didn't have the economic wherewithal to make it on their own. That's really a false assumption, because these economies were not free. They were still colonized economies, but the burden of the responsibilities of the state was turned over to the locals, so to speak, while the wealth of the nation, which was extracted, and those that were left to be extracted, were still in the hands of a few on the island, and a few off the island, of course, was a part of the bigger system. So it's not like we couldn't make it on our own. we were not, we were lacking in human capital in that most of our people were uneducated or undereducated. Our leaders were mostly colonial leaders, meaning their mindset were colonials. They went to England, they went to England school, they learned England's way of that, the way England wants them to think. So for example, Norman Manley was a Rhodes Scholar and taught law and was taught law in the UK. Bustamante was a tremendous lover of the monarchy and would, admire everything and anything about the UK. So they would try to mimic them in how they developed the country. Smarter leaders, and there are only a few of them at the time, would know that you don't want to mimic your former colonial masters. You want to understand what they've done to you and what you need to do now to build your people up. And that wasn't the case. Jamaica tried to imitate their colonial masters instead of understanding the markets and understand the environment and move to develop themselves. So Manley, like many other leaders, quickly moved to socialism, number one, and then number two, engaged in massive borrowing from their former colonial masters to develop their countries in the way that they were told that they're supposed to seek to develop their countries. Any comment on that before we continue with the film? No? Okay. We continue.
What all the food from a broadcast, you realize that the food production to feed ourselves in Jamaica is not only a matter of opportunity for you, it's a matter of survival for the nation. Comes 1973, there is a world convulsion caused by the oil price increases. All of a sudden, we are having to find sums of money we never dreamed of before just to make ends meet. Now, what can you do? First of all, you go to the private banking system and you see, well, can I get a private banking loan? Because I'm strapped for cash, I need some support, and I'm having trouble paying my overseas bills.
When the private banks won't lend to you, then you've got to do something if you're leader of the country. And typically what you've got to do is to cut back your spending in some way and try and get more money so that the impact of those cutbacks are not as severe as they otherwise would be.
Just to interrupt here again, why wouldn't the private banks want to lend to you? Who are the private banks? So here is the private banks are a part of the global banking system. They take their cues from the global bankers, the global elites. Now, if Jamaica had recognized how money really worked, then the central bank would have truly been the Bank of Jamaica, and we would have been in a position to print our own money, not money that we pretend to be printing for ourselves, but printing our own money and basing that on our own productivity and meeting our local needs. In terms of importation, you would be constrained in your importation by the base of your productivity. And therefore, as a nation, you'd have to adjust your appetite to your capacity to export. And what they would have done is allow you the time now to build up your own markets. But if you're told and bought into the idea that you need to imitate your colonial masters instantaneously and try to live like them, as opposed to modeling your economy off your own capacity to produce, your own capacity to build your own banking system and build your own monetary system and live off that, as Cuba was forced to do. Because Cuba was under the embargo, they were forced to figure it out themselves and work. And the only thing that stopped them from working effectively is because there's constantly a push and a pull between trying to be like the colonial masters as opposed to adjusting to yourself fully. They were forced to adjust. And so they adjusted and in many cases succeeded. And the problem with Cuba is that they continued to be communistic, meaning believing that government must dictate your life. If they had moved away from that and then did all the other things they were trying to do, become self-reliant in their agriculture, in their own energy production, in their own manufacturing, they would have been even much better today. But they stuck with the socialistic, communistic ideals, which robbed you of individual property rights. And once you lose individual property rights, your productivity is always going to be challenged because you're not motivated properly. So Jamaica went the other way. They went socialism, A, and 2, try to imitate their colonial masters, 3, and then bought into the monetary system of your colonial masters, and then find themselves now dependent on that system rather than growing their own local economy and their own local banking system and building a government that does not have to borrow from private banks to survive. You may have to borrow occasionally, but it must be for high value infrastructure projects, which will pay for themselves very quickly, as opposed to borrowing to pay teachers, borrowing to pay politicians, and large public administration that shuffles paper and sits on boards and consume the nation's resources without producing anything. But let's go back to Mr. Mann. Yes,
Sir,
go ahead.
just
Yeah.
can you tell us what the consequences of all this interference from or at least interaction with the IMF has on the Jamaican population today? Because it seems to be a very big impact throughout the world. I was watching a video on Africa and how it devastated Africa. So how has it impacted? I recall also in college, we were told to watch a video, Jamaica in Debt, and how all this ties into the devastation of the banana crops, because then the Jamaican government was compelled to take products from the USA as opposed to supporting their farmers, etc. So what has been the consequence up to today as a result of all this borrowing and conditions attached to the borrowing?
Well, remember, nobody forces you, generally speaking, and there are pressures as well, but generally speaking, nobody forces you to borrow, right? It's you decide if you want to borrow and what consequences you're willing to live with. Now, our governments of the last several years decided that they want to be a part of the system that we're now complaining about. We decided we want to be a part of that system. We want to model our country up based on the models that they have given us. We don't want to model it ourselves. So clearly, over time, you need to do what your masters tell you. So if they say to you, for conditions of you getting the loan, you need to stop having organic farming and you need to take our GMO seeds, for example. And then you need to buy into our fertilization. So you stop using your organic fertilizers. You need to now start using imported fertilizers that are more expensive. You need to open your markets up to producers who have greater economies of scales and are highly subsidized by their government that has a an outsized economic advantage because they have a reserve currency that has been mandated on the world. So now you are trying to compete with them, opening your markets, but not having the capacity to compete. And you buy into now the idea of watering down your agricultural sector. So it becomes, a fast-paced production system where you produce fast and quick, right? But you're now depleting the quality of what you're producing because you're now doing it using artificial fertilizer, genetically modified seeds, and you're now building cancerous things into your own society, not realizing that you're not winning, but you think you're winning in the short term. You think you're getting ahead because your lenders are even giving you grants. They even give you free seeds, and we love freeness. So our governments bought into that model, and so we get the free seeds and we get the initial free fertilizers, and our farmers are glad and happy for it because they see how quick it grow, how nice it look, and then now the importation now of those products are cheaper than what they can produce, even with the fast fertilizer and whatever. And so now they're compromised because they can't compete anymore with these imported. And the people at home are suffering. So they are going to buy the cheaper carrots that is imported and the expensive carrot produced here. That's just normal economics, and I can't blame them. Don't blame the people. The people are going to do what they think is best to just survive. And if our government in our schools didn't teach us so that we would have a resilient mind, would have an understanding of what the game that our enemies are playing, we might want to mute mute yourself, Mrs. Hogarth. You're coming through with your private convo. So our people didn't go to school and learn what is really happening to us. So because we don't know what's happening to us, we just make our basic day-to-day decision. And we'll go buy the imported onion, we'll buy the imported tomato, we'll buy anything. And I'm not blaming us because we don't know. We don't know. And why would you go and buy the expensive one when you're trying to make ends meet, unless you were highly intelligent, highly trained to understand the consequences and realize that for the short-term gains economically, you will have long-term health pains, for example, and know that trade-off. So we can't blame the people. So the bottom line is, Miss Walker, our governments, our leaders led us there. I know they like for us to blame the IMF. The IMF, the IMF is like a gang, a cartel, right? It's like if you're in a community, we have gangs in Jamaica. Our job is to get rid of the gangs. Yeah, if we're going to run our country right, our job is to figure out how do we have a police system that is going to help us to track down and eliminate the gangs. Why do we want to join the gangs globally? So if we join globally and join with the gangs, then we're going to get the result of joining with the gangs. Locally, our politicians joined with the gangs, and they themselves helped to create gangs in our communities and garrison communities. And they gave government contracts to dons, and the dons became powerful to the point where the dons started to control the politicians. So once you play those games, you're going to get the natural consequences. And what we're seeing economically in Jamaica and around the world, in the Caribbean, we're getting the results of the games that our leaders have played with our lives, and so on. But I think I should stop there.
So we're seeing we have spoke on the IMF as an organization and similar organizations as these as having a motive, being a business itself. And if when you're a business, you have your interests in profit. We mentioned that they have a shadow of a global economic goodwill that can be rife with corruption and so forth. And from the video, we heard the speaker mention that we're moving into somebody else's power interest. So essentially speaking, Mr. President, and anybody else can chime in, what we're technically saying to the Jamaican people, a word that is very familiar to them, we are still having that spirit of slavery, as you mentioned, Mr. Patterson, from the colonial masters. It is in essence, you mentioned that technically we can't fully blame them because they themselves do not know. One comment that just came in from your occupational therapy coach says, "Thanks for educating the people." And isn't this what it's all about, Mr. Patterson? Educating the Jamaican people so that they can have the knowledge and the understanding how to make truthful and proper decisions. Claudette, you want to chime in?
All right. So the one thing I can remember, which me can't get past, is when we were told that trying to find the word, but when the dollar was sliding and they said that it is good for the country, and I see politicians buying into it. I mean, say how we should be paying more money for a US dollar and that can be good for us. So as much as I did not know all of which is explaining now, but I knew that some major players were involved in our economy and just wasn't good for us.
Can I, for a moment here, just comment on the exchange rate issue, Mr. I'm going to call it Mr. Chairman for simplicity. Can I comment on the exchange rate issue? And I hope others will jump in as well. When it comes on to exchange rate, people have this huge misunderstanding. It's nothing magical. It's very simple. Your nation's exchange rate, except when it's being manipulated by other forces, is generally based on your ability to produce relative to what you import. So Jamaica's case, for example, we generally import 3 times what we export, generally, give or take. So we earn importation dollars of, let's say, $33, and we export, and we need to buy things from other people about $100. So we have to spend $100 to buy things from other people, and we only export to other people where they pay us $33. Now, if you're importing far more than you're exporting, there will be an imbalance in trade, and the value of your dollar will go down. So the more you have to import from other people, and the less you're able to import an equal value to them or anybody else, your value, your dollar is going to drop. So Jamaica's dollar is a reflection normally of the productivity of its people. So every year our productivity goes down. That's why if you go to Santa Cruz today, you'll see that more and more of the buildings that are owned in Santa Cruz are being owned by the Chinese. Because our people, we have lost our purchasing power. We as a people are becoming poorer and poorer in Jamaica, even if we're living roughly in a way that seems sort of okay. Like you'll see a lady going to the bank to work and she has on a nice high heel, she has on stocking. Her clothes look good, her nails are good, her hair is good, and she look nice and fancy. But the truth is, if you go check out her house, she's living a fairly meager existence in general terms. Very meager at home, but she put on the best outside. My mother, for example, as a single mother with 3 children, when you see her step out of the house, she look immaculate, she look wicked. You know, I used to so admire my mom. She looks really nice all the time. But if you come and look at her house, we now want to look at one room, literally, like I mean, about 10 feet by 10 feet room, 1 door and 2 window on it, and you have 1 bed and so on. And we live in a little square in the middle, and we eat cornmeal and callaloo most days for dinner. You know, so we were living a meager life, but my mother said you must go out and look good. You must look good when you step out of the house. So we look okay, but we're suffering, generally speaking. Now, that happens right across Jamaica. Many people look good on the outside, but they're struggling and suffering at home. There are some people who are augmenting their income. For example, there are some young ladies and young men today who have their day job and then do a side hustle. The side hustle may or may not be very moral. Some are prostituting themselves to make ends meet. And we're talking seriously here now. You understand? There are some people who are augmenting their income by stealing from their employers. So they get their regular salary and they find a way to pay for some of the things that are being sold by the company, and they sell it back and augment their income by that. That's why the men who drive the taxis and the buses, they find a way to keep the gas out of it and sell back the gas or use the gas. If they work in a garage, they find a way to steal parts and sell back the parts and augment their income. So the whole country becomes highly corrupted by this system because people cannot earn a decent income to meet their needs. Why is this? Let me tell you something if you don't understand. Money is not the problem. A bad monetary system is. And what is a bad monetary system? It doesn't mean that it is inherently bad. It is designed badly in order to rip you off. So let's say, for example, you're in an economy where all of us have the same amount of money, $1,000 each. We all have $1,000 to spend. Now, it means whatever goods we're buying in the society, sorry, there are flies on these little night flies with the lights on the patio to start bothering me. But let's say we all have $1,000, in the economy, and that's all we have. Each of us have $1,000. The price of everything will remain static as long as we all just have $1,000 circulating, because we're buying the same goods every day, roughly speaking. The price will remain the same. There'll be no increase in prices, no inflation. Now, let's say you have a hurricane that wipe out some of the stock. Let's say all pumpkins were wiped out. Only a few pumpkin farmers were left with some pumpkins. Then the price of pumpkins would go up. You call that natural inflation because you have less pumpkins due to a disaster, and still everybody wants pumpkins. So the price of pumpkin goes up. They call that natural inflation. But let's say a few of us in the economy, no natural inflation, no. A few of us in the economy find a way to go and counterfeit and print some extra money by ourselves. Nobody will know about it. So we go and double our $1,000 and triple our $1,000. We now have more money. You guys don't know about it because you're not seeing exactly what I have. And we now start to spend that money into the economy. Suddenly, the sellers of certain goods realize that the demand for those goods are going up. So they will raise their prices to match
Sir,
the demand. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
can you explain with all that you're saying about what has gone wrong if you have a clear vision? How does your policy how will your policy make a difference in this regard? How will it affect the Jamaican people and make a change for the positive?
Well, I will explain that, but if they don't understand what I'm talking about first, they won't understand what I'm saying afterwards. So when I tell them what we need to do,
great.
they won't get it because they don't know why they need to do it. So I'm saying now you have this small group of people who have a lot more money now because of counterfeiting happening backstage. They're spending that money into the economy, and pushing up housing prices, for example, pushing up the price of other items. The common man don't understand why this is happening. I'll make it very specific now. So Jamaica doesn't produce its own money. We don't print our own money. So suppose those in the UK who print our money decides that they're going to push an extra $1 billion into the economy without us knowing. What will happen? The common man won't know what's going on physically, but that money will still be circulating. Who will get the benefit of that money? The people who get that $1 billion to spend first, they will get the first benefit. Because when you have money introduced into an economy like that, a piece of the value of everybody else's money declines and moves to those people. So if you had 1,000 today and somebody introduced a fake or counterfeit additional 1,000 in the economy, the value of your 1,000 just halved. You experience that as higher prices. The person who get that money into the system first, he experienced that as unearned wealth. So when your bank is able to lend money into the economy, which it never earned, it gets unearned wealth to itself immediately. And you, the people, know your money has halved or whatever, just dropped. The value has gone down. And you experience it as higher prices while the bank experienced that as multi-billion-dollar profits. The same thing works for the IMF. The same thing works for the central bank in Jamaica. The same thing works for the private banks associated with that system, because they're given the fractional monetary system, fractional system that allows them to lend money into the system that they never earned. It will cost them nothing to earn the money there. But for you to borrow to pay back that money, you have to earn, you have to slave, you have to work. So they're robbing you. They're actually stealing your labor, stealing your time. They're taking time away from your children, time away from your spouse, time away from recreation, time away from your health, because you have to work harder to make back this money, to pay back this money. So when you get a mortgage that should have been for $7 million for a house, because of all of this trickery, the house is now $20 million initial price, plus interest on top of that over the next 30 years. That's 30 years of your life that has been stolen. And it has been stolen from your children and from your family. And that's why you now have a lot of mental problems in our society. Many children left unattended, and the consequences mushroom. What is my solution to that? We must extricate ourselves from that monetary system. We must build our own monetary system, completely separate from that. Do it strategically, do it diplomatically, but separate from it nonetheless, so that you can now allow your citizens to have a dollar which is backed by their productivity, doesn't stray far from the productivity level, so the purchasing power remains static. So you don't have inflation, you don't have deflation, you don't have a bank telling you that they have targeted 3 to 6% of your money to be stolen from you. Your own government saying, we're going to thief 3 to 6% of your money they tell us, they telegraph it. The Bank of Jamaica said every year we're targeting 3 to 6% inflation, which means every year we're going to steal 3 to 6% of your money. It might sometimes be higher than that, 11, 12%. It might be slightly lower, 1 to 2 or 3%. But cumulatively, that's compounding theft. And so they're compounding the amount, them thieving from your money, which is reducing your capacity to exist, increasing the amount of energy and effort you have to put out to earn, and then locking you into longer term mortgages. A house that should have been paid off in 5 years, you're taking 25 and 30 years. Some people in Jamaica never finish building their houses. It's impossible based on what they're earning unless they get into thieving. Now, that's where our local colonial parties benefit now. Because if they can promise you a special kind of corruption, if you join their thing, right? People who join them, people who wear jacket and tie to government offices and so on, who are a part of the corruption. And if they play the game right, when their party win, them get something under the table. There are persons right now who sit in boardrooms. They're getting $100, $200, $300,000 every month for nothing. They're not working for it. They go to board meetings. They've been placed on this board by the government, on that board. And so all of these people are namming out our money. Them are nyam we out. We the workers, while they go and get these government board seats. And they're happy. That's why they'll never say nothing against the government. And if they try to be balanced, I say the same against PNP and GLP, where I am balanced. And they play the game, but they know what they're getting behind the scene. That's why they'll control the media the way it does, because They're going to get something for doing what they do to keep the UIC out of the people's eyes. And it's an entire system, and it's working beautifully for those at the top. And the middlemen, our politicians and the subservients under them, are working in concert without even understanding it. I understand it. You might understand it. Many of them don't even know what they're doing, but they're doing it because they're getting what is called concentrated benefit while the cost is dispersed over all of us. So all of we pay the price generally, while a few of them get the benefit. Go ahead, Mr. Corbin.
Just to support what you're saying there, boss, is that the IMF loans that come in to make all of that crookery work, what a lot of people don't realize is that the Caribbean countries who borrow money from the IMF are mandated to repay those loans to the US dollar, not to local currency.
Oh.
If you are repaying your loans to local currency, the inflation is not there to be stolen. If you're repaying to the US dollar, because the inflation happens as a result of having to pay back the US dollar, that's easier money to be stolen. And that's it. It's usury in its worst form.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Now, we can continue with the video whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay, good. Let me put it back up here for us. Whoops. There we go.
And it's at that point that you generally, then you go to do something if you're the leader of a country. And typically what you go to do is to cut back your spending in some way and try and get more money so that the impact of those cutbacks are not as severe as they otherwise would be. And it's at that point that you generally come to the IMF.
We are not for sale. And tell them anytime they are willing to deal with an honorable Jamaica based on principles, sovereignty, pride, and dignity, then we will talk the investment of the money.
Bear in mind, this is a country literally beginning to unravel because it cannot finance what it needs. Because you can't have no penicillin in the hospital. You can't have no wheat to make bread.
And we would say, yep, that's true. We understand the crisis you're in, and we need to fix the underlying reasons for that crisis. And so here is what we think needs doing.
What you really need is to sit down with them and say, look, can I work out a 5-year program? And in the meantime, I'm strapped for some cash, so can you help me up front get out of the cash bind and then put it in the context of a long-term development plan? And they said, no, long-term development is your problem. We are here only to see who do you owe the money to, why are you in a bind, and we'll lend you some money in a very short time frame at full interest rate to get you out of the bind. And they then impose upon you tremendous restrictions in what you can spend.
And then we reach agreement on a set of measures on the budget, on the exchange rate, on monetary policy, on interest rates, on banks, on maybe privatization, and say, yep, we think this could solve your problem.
And you say to them, but if I do it that way, when I finish repaying you, I'm going to be in the bind all over because this can't solve my problem. They said, not our problem.
Okay, this is the
whole idea was to set conditions which the government could not meet. And when the government failed to meet them, you would have to renegotiate a new loan in which the conditions became tighter. So the IMF didn't say, cut out this education program or cut out this health program. What the IMF said is, you must spend only so much money on health and education. And the implication of that was that you had to cut out some programs.
Essentially, what the IMF wanted us to do was to devalue our currency. That's the first thing, to make our dollar cheaper.
They needed to expand their exports and diminish their imports. And the best way of doing that is to make foreign currency more expensive.
And since our society is so heavily dependent on imported food, imported fuel, imported books to go to school, imported medicine, when we devalue, the cost of those things we import go up to the citizens. And as a result, the economy today is much more under the control of foreigners, not necessarily through direct ownership, but through the mechanism of debt. In the 1970s, we owed $800 million. By the end of the 1980s, we owed $4 billion. Nowadays, we owe $7 billion. So the debt is rising, and all the time the debt is rising, our capacity to export, to produce, is getting less.
In Washington, they just looked at us and said, no. Your inflation last year was 18%. And under the positive inflation rate theory of interest, that means we're not allowing you to lend your farmers our money, which we lend you, at 12%. You must charge 23%. I remember I took 2 trips, it was, to Washington to say, it is wrong economic policy, it is wrong socially, it is wrong to say that we must force the farmers to pay that rate of interest, or you won't lend us the money.
Typically, in an IMF program, there'll be some assumption about the way interest rates are going to go.
And I remember saying, which are you who are going to face an American farmer and tell him that to borrow something for his farm, he must pay 23%? I said, they'll run you out of the White House and out of Congress. Oh, that's their business. We are dealing with your business.
Wow.
Interesting there. Couple things from the video that I want to put to you, Mr. Patterson, or any member of the panel. So a couple things we see coming out of the video from what you said early on, Mr. Patterson. This idea of imitating the colonial masters and their pattern. Because basically what we have developed so far tonight is the idea that the system is in such a bad state from the start, from the get-go, that it's almost impossible for Jamaica to have economic recovery, and as you mentioned, for the regular day-to-day Jamaican to have economic prosperity. But I know that, everyone knows that the speaker in the video is regular. Every Jamaican knows that's Michael Manley. I have a question for you, Mr. Patterson. Because we're not promoting any of the colonial parties here on the show or anything. But historically, it seems as if from the onset, Manley didn't want to engage with the IMF, but he was, eventually, he went into, during his government time, went into agreements with the IMF. Do you think the other political party, I'm not sure if that's something you want to go into, but do you think the other political party was more, they favored more the idea of a relationship with the IMF, starting with Edward Seaga and now to our present administration?
I think that is really not the right question. Right. Both parties and their leaders come from a particular place where their mindset is not correct for Jamaica. You might recall that Bustamante said at the very beginning, I am with the Queen and I am for the Queen. That's what he said when they're developing the Jamaican Constitution, which is not Jamaica's Constitution. So Bustamante made it clear that his frame of thinking, his mind, where he was at, was with the Queen and for the Queen. That means whatever we do in Jamaica must be in keeping with the monarchy. Mm-hmm. Norman Manley, who was Bustamante's cousin, the second member of the 2 founding fathers of Jamaica, if you want to call them that. They're not the founding fathers, they're the wrecking fathers. But Norman Manley, his frame of reference was he's working in tandem with his cousin to make sure that they end up with a 2-party system that favored their existence, their longevity, their position at the top of a hierarchy, which says, here are these poor Black peasants who need leadership, and we're going to provide the leadership for them to keep a system in place that will be stable for the rest of us. Because if we were to allow them, they might turn to a man like Marcus Garvey, who had a radical view, which said we were to believe in ourselves and we were to see ourselves as capable of building our own political and economic systems that would meet our needs, and not a system that would pander to and be controlled by the colonial masters or their local representatives that we know as the local elites. So Michael Manley came in his first election won was 1972 and again in 1976, and he lost the 1980 election. He learned from his father the ideals of socialism. And what was socialism? And don't get me wrong, I want people to understand what is happening here. The idea of these men when they came onto socialism was how they were going to organize the social structure of Jamaica. And one of the principles that they taught the people was that, and I hate to say it this way, but this is really how it came across in the Jamaican people. They must hate the rich people, or who they pointed as the rich people. And they, as gods and government, is going to find a way to take money from some, wealth from some, and give to them. The principle we needed in Jamaica instead was the one where we as individuals must first secure our freedom, our individual liberty. Secondly, we must own property. And if Norman Manley and Michael Manley meant the people well, he would make sure that all Jamaicans became property owner, because that's the basis of wealth. You owning property. If you don't own property, you are property. I'll say it again. If you don't own property, you are property. And we were property until 1834, the fake freedom, where they claim now we were our own. They didn't even say it that way, but they claim we were free. But watch what they did in 1834, 1838. They made sure that even though they freed the slaves, they never gave them back their property. So the slave now only had one option: to go and beg a job from his former slave master, which made him a slave all over again. But now he's a slave that must find him own dwelling, him own clothes, him own food, and him own shelter, and will work for a pittance and live in squalor. And that's how the Jamaicans were living, in squalor. And even today, if you go down a Elam, or go up a Bogue, or go over Braze River, or go over Northampton, the people, many of them are living in squalor. They might have put 2 blocks upon another with a few pieces of steel in it and put on a piece of zinc roof on it, but they're living generally in squalor. They can't put in proper plumbing in their bathrooms. They can't have decent, nice living rooms. They can't have a decent, nice kitchen. They can't have a decent, nice patio. So they have maintained the people, for the most part, still in a form of slavery, but now it's wage slavery. Now you're on your own fully, and we pretend as if you're in a free and fair economy, but we know that it's heavily stacked against you. And then we send you to school now, and we give you a debilitating education where you don't understand math because we teach it in a way that makes it hard for you to get it. You don't understand economics. You don't understand money. You don't understand relationships. You don't understand human behavior. And so you're fully at the mercy of those who are capable of manipulating us. Go ahead, Mr. Corbett.
Yeah. Very
In
well
addition,
said.
in addition to that, they committed the ultimate sin of continual slavery by then mandating to all of the freed slaves that they must sign a birth certificate. They put the birth certificate system in place under Admiralty law.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to sign your name in capital letters. And once you had signed your name in capital letters, that means that you were owned by the state. You now become chattel property. You can be traded on the stock exchange. And that is precisely what is happening today. It is still going on. When you have a birth certificate and you have your name in capital letters, you have signed your value to the state and you are traded on the stock exchange as chattel property. Because you don't own any property and because you don't own anything, you are still the property of the state. And this is where the whole misconception comes in with regard to property ownership. We are told by the bank that we can give them a mortgage. Please put your name here, and you put your name in capital letters. Mm-hmm. You have just created the money the bank will use for you to pay them back by your labor. And that is where.
And by the way, you never own the property.
You never own the property.
You're
Never become a homeowner or a property owner. You are a slave to the system who owns everything that you think you own.
So
this is where the legal fiction is.
So you're nothing but a property holder. So when you buy a piece of property, this very house I bought this property here. I didn't inherit my 36 acres of land. I slaved and earned and bought it. I wasn't in politics and got any ill-gotten gains and built a mansion on a hill. I earned every dollar and bought this property and then earned every dollar and built this house, but I'm still not the owner. I'm a property holder, because as long as I pay, if I stop paying the rent on this property, the rent called property tax, they can come and take this from me. It is a wicked colonial construct to have people pay property taxes. Because what it means, one second, Mr. Corbin, what it means is this: as you get older, as we all know, as you get older, your capacity to earn diminishes.
Mm-hmm.
And while your capacity to earn is diminishing, property tax is going up. And so your stress level, which is how they get to kill you quickly and take what is yours, your stress level is going up, because as you get irate, oh my God, me have to find money to pay this property tax.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, as you're getting older, and remember, because your house is quite depreciable, the roof needs fixing, the plumbing needs fixing, the electrical needs fixing, the walkway or driveway, if you're lucky to have one, needs fixing, the grill is rusting and needs replacing and repairing. So all these costs are coming on you as you're aging, yeah, and as your income earning is diminishing and you're aging, the property tax and the cost of maintaining your home is going up. It is a wicked and diabolical scheme that our leaders, well, misleaders, they have perpetuated this when they were supposed to educate us and extract us from that system and say, go with that. We're now participating in a colonial and give the Jamaican people their property. Make sure all the families, the indigenous Jamaicans, all of us own property, which is going to be transferred from generation to generation, which would give us generational wealth and build us up over time. Instead, they're depreciating us over time, extracting billions of dollars in fake mortgages, where you borrow money that them never earn. They just get, as Corbin is saying, they just get to lend you money based on the fact that you're a chattel still. And they lend you money and punish you for 30 years to pay back that. So you end up paying 2 to 4 times what it should have been costing you for that home. Sometimes a little matches box. Sometimes you chuck up on all heap other people. You lock up in a one little something. So one neighbor here, so with a piece of wall, one here, so, and you're fenced in, and you're going to pay for 30 years for that. So the point is, we have to have our own monetary system. We have to change the property laws and make sure that people become true property owners. We have to change our education system and make sure our children learn. They need to know 3 things: understand themselves, mind, body, and personality and character, right? You have to understand human behavior, human relationship, how to have good family relationship, business relationship, friend relationship, how to build lasting relationships in your family and friends. And thirdly, you must understand money, economics. If you don't understand it, you'll be tricked and tricked and tricked. And we have been tricked for the last 80 years. And it's time for us to stop that now.
Angela Burke says in the comment section, the bank becomes your trustee of our homes. We're just property holders. Mm-hmm. And just to pick up on a couple points that you made, Mr. President, and I kind of like, I'm not sure if it's possible for us to kind of, I know you mentioned some of these in some of the stuff that you said, but with regards to the idea, and just to couple with what Angela Burke just said, the idea of not owning your own, the idea of the bank owning, the idea that we are in the country in general, the regular people of Jamaica is in this dire economic situation. It is because of the heavy laden of the debt. I don't know if any one of you want to help us out here, help the viewers to understand. I know you mentioned some stuff earlier on, Mr. Patterson, but the idea of a country, a government's GDP or net income being so aggressive that the regular Jamaicans, it is very difficult for them to be productive in their own lives and in their own financial situation. I know you mentioned some stuff about that, Mr. Patterson, but this is kind of like the highlight that we want the Jamaican people to understand. You know, this system that we are speaking against, the whole colonial system that we mentioned, the effects and the impacts that it has on the productivity of the regular Jamaican on a daily basis to empower his or her economic situation.
Yeah. So if anybody else want to go, please go, because I'll take over the whole thing. Go ahead, Fred.
Well, no, I want to thank you very much for bringing that level of education to our people and to bringing the knowledge in support of the education. And I just want to support what you're saying there, boss, is that the system is set up where allodial title is denied. Allodial title is where absolute ownership is denied, and only custodial ownership or temporary ownership is empowered through slave labor. So when you get a mortgage, you are only the custodian of what your labor builds, what you basically bust your tail to do, and at the end of the day, you're only a custodian for a short period of time. In addition to that, most of the mortgages today mandate that the mortgage holder have a life insurance policy. So if you die before you have paid your mortgage, they collect your life insurance. That's exactly what's happening right here in the Caribbean. They mandate, oh, do you have life insurance? No, I don't have life insurance. Oh, well, we can't lend you the money to buy the house. Even although you are signing and creating the money to buy the property or to pay for custodial ownership. When you then produce the documentation from the insurance company saying, oh, I have life insurance. How much is the life insurance worth? The life insurance has to be worth at least 3 times the mortgage value. Why is that? Because if you die before you finish paying your mortgage, they collect not only the value of what you have put in, but the value of what you have signed and created upon creation of the mortgage documents. It is the most criminal system on the planet. And like I said, I've been saying all along, a one Caribbean currency that has a gold-backed standard, which every single Caribbean country can be aligned on the same value, allows full allodial title for every single one of our sovereign nationals in every single territory.
I want to comment on 2 things. One is the issue of debt and the impact of debt, and the other is what kind of currency we should have, gold backed or otherwise. So there's some serious things to understand there. First and foremost, normally no government needs to borrow money privately. Normally, you might have an abnormal situation where you need to borrow privately, and this will be the only reason. Either you have a major natural disaster that wipes out your country and you're completely destabilized and you need some help by borrowing money from other countries to be able to rebuild your infrastructure and economy. That's one reason. Major national disaster. Or you see an opportunity that you want to take advantage of very quickly that will boost your productivity and make your nation wealthier. And so you want to borrow monies to be able to buy things external to your economy to be able to do that in an aggressive way and build. That's the only 2 reasons you need to borrow externally. In Jamaica and many other countries, they defy that law and they borrow for any and every reason. So, for example, Jamaica, we borrow money from the private banks in Jamaica, the private interest in Jamaica, and from multinational organizations and banks outside to pay teachers, to pay nurses, to pay politicians, to pay garbage collectors, and so on. None of those things you need to borrow money for. You can print your own money and have your own, if you will, let me call it for simplicity, central bank that produces your money to match the productive work of your people, and you're creating a circular effect. So as government, you're producing the money so that I can buy from you and you can buy from me, and we have this intermediary. So money is just serving an intermediary role. Money doesn't mean anything. Money is only, in a proper economy, money is just an intermediary. It's not valuable. What's valuable is the work I do and the work you do. So if I cut your lawn, that is real work, and you give me money so I can go and buy food from somebody who produces food. So my value of cutting your lawn is there because I did cut your lawn, and the person who produced the food, that value is there because they produced the food, and the money is just an interchange. So if you follow that model, you don't need to borrow money outside your economy or from private banks internally. The only reason why they do it the way they do it now is so the banks can steal from you. Now, when they borrow private money from the local banks or anybody else, or issue bonds or whatever they call it, when they do that, what they're doing is creating a means to give unearned wealth to those other persons. Okay? Because the persons who buy most of the bonds are not ordinary persons like me and you. They're big corporate interests. And so they've created a scheme whereby this debt instrument allows the government to unfairly tax us more to give these entities a reward, unearned reward, which makes them wealthier and makes you poorer. Do you understand? Anybody is shady on that? So Jamaica, Canada, America, England, New Zealand, Africa, none of them needs to be in debt the way we are in debt now. And if they were going to be in debt, it's the way you and I should get into debt. Let's say you want to do a major business. You have figured out something meaningful, very meaningful, that you can add value to society. But you don't have all the money right now to build out that situation. So you go and get a loan to build it out so that the loan for $1 million will earn you $2, $3, $4, $5 million because of the magnificent product or service you're offering. So you're multiplying the loan by the productivity value that you're going to push out into society. Okay, that's how you borrow. So when a country does borrow, what should happen when they borrow? Like Jamaica borrowed trillions of dollars, right? What should have happened? Jamaica should be prettier. You should have much better roads, great sidewalks, street lights in areas that they're not now. You should have beautifully well-built schools with the tools and equipment that is making our kids brilliant and highly productive. Our engineers should be building our roads, not China building our roads. Our highways should be being built by our engineers. Our hospitals and other buildings should be designed by our architects, managed by our construction firms, built with our technology and whatever. That's not happening because the monies that were borrowed and three things happened to them. They were either mismanaged, wasted, or stolen, which means you never got the productive value out of it, but you now have the debt to pay back. And how do you pay back the debt? How do you pay back the debt? You're paying the debt today. Let's say you borrow $100. You're paying back the $100 plus 15 years, 20 years of interest. Okay? How do you pay that? You pay that by skimping on fixing the roads. You pay that by skimping on paying the teachers. You pay that on skimping on paying the police officers. So the quality of your policing goes down and crime. The quality of your education goes down and dunceness and unproductivity goes up. The quality of your environment. You come to most communities, they have no community centers. None. If they have one, it's shabby and dirty and uninhabitable, right? Do you have a community center in your community, Miss Barrett? Do you have one in yours, Mr. Nelson? A good one, a nice one with a gymnasium, a library, a study areas, air conditioned and sweet and nice. Do you have that in your communities?
I'm only seeing trees when I look outside.
Exactly. And not even well-maintained trees either. Now, when I went to Singapore the other day, my friends, I went to Singapore the other day. Every community I go to have a massive, well-designed community center with spaces for different things happening. The kids, the families have no problem. They come home from school, they just go out and enjoy themselves in well-maintained spaces. How did they do that? They had a government that was able to organize and plan and meticulously design and implement so that the people were cared for. In Jamaica, our government have absolutely no care whatsoever for the people of Jamaica. And the people of Jamaica don't even know because they don't know better.
Right.
They get up every day and live in squalor. Our communities are in squalor. Our entire nation is in squalor. And we live in that squalor. You go downtown, the capital of Jamaica, you're stepping over sewage running in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
You go downtown, the capital of Jamaica, you see people living in dilapidated houses and buildings that hasn't been repaired for 50 years or more. You go to hospitals and people are sleeping on the floor, couched up on a piece of chair, a piece of dilapidated bed. That is Jamaica. And they're pretending like they have been governing. They have not been governing this country. They have been raping this country. But you go to Andrew Holness's house, it's a beautiful
Oh.
Beverly Hills, isn't it?
So it's not like they don't have taste. They have the capacity to want nice things, but they don't want those nice things for the people because they still have the colonial master's mindset. Remember, in the colonial days, what happened? The great house, the beautiful great house, the palace. And your dream as a slave is to work in the great house. Your dream is to be a house slave. Now they are Jamaica's house slave. And they live in the big house. And the rest of the people them live in the slave houses, wearing the slave clothes and eating like the slave and suffering the indignity like the slaves. That's what they want for Jamaica. And they have maintained that, which is why to this very day, we still talk about republic. No, their view of a republic is just having a president and no longer a monarchy. That's foolishness. A republic is far more than that. A republic is a nation that respects the sovereignty of every individual. It is a nation that respects its collective sovereignty. It is a nation that puts the people first, not the leaders. The leaders are there, not as leaders, by the way, as administrators, because the people are leaders themselves. So you know of administrators, people who administer the affairs, and they're held to account. And it's a meritocracy because all of those are only in their respective position because they have earned it by merit, not by buying votes or tricking and stealing to get into their position. And so the UIC wants to change. Miss Walker, you asked me, what will we do to change? That's what we want to do, to make Jamaica a true republic, a real republic, where we, the citizens, are sovereign and the collective sovereignty is protected. Our money is real and backed by our productivity, not some fake fiat idea. And Mr. Kobe, we can't use gold because we don't produce gold. And if you make the backing of your money something you don't produce, you're weakening your capacity to compete globally. So your money must be backed by something you produce. And the one thing we all produce or fail to if we don't want to is productivity. So if you back your money by the productivity of the people, then you'll always have the value of your money reflecting our productivity. Now, I know many people don't know how this works or how to do it. That's where I and other thinkers come in, because we have spent the time to study money, understand economics, and know how to build a monetary system that is 100% tied to the productivity of the people, which then throws out the IMF, throws out the World Bank, because they become inconsequential and unimportant. Because now the people will have real money, not fiat money. Fiat means fake money. Gold is very restrictive because gold is only produced in certain places, and there are other factors. But gold is better than fiat money. Gold-backed money is better than fiat money, but productivity money is better than all money because every nation can control their own productivity. Singapore, for example, boost their productivity from $1,500 in GDP per capita in the 1950s and 60s to over $65,000 today. Jamaica moved from the same number to only $5,000 to $7,000 today. We can do better, but we need leaders who understand economics, who mean our people well, and who really want to have Jamaicans become property owners and sovereign individuals in their own land.
Wow.
Desmond Powell says, is it safe to say Jamaica is dying from debts? Jasmine Powell in the comment section. Is it safe to say Jamaica is dying from debts?
We're dying from misleaders. Them a kill we. Norman Manley, Buster Manty, Michael Manley, PJ Patterson, Edward Siaga, Portia Simpson Miller, Bruce Golden, Andrew Holness, them a kill we. They are all misleaders. And don't get me wrong, some of them did it innocently. I believe Manley meant well. I look at him, I listen to him, he meant well. But he studied economics in England. And that was the problem. He went there and he studied economics. You see, I studied accounting, for example, here in Jamaica and in Canada. I studied engineering here in Jamaica. But what I discovered, I must not trust my learning. The Bible says, prove all things, test all things. So I questioned everything. I remember when I was doing my degree in finance and management, and one of my classes we were to look at wisdom books, they call it. So we were to look at the Jakarta, the Torah, the Bible, and some other wisdom books. And they were discussing. And I said why I believe the things I believe. Because they say you make sure that they warn you. Don't say nothing where you can back up because we're going to give you a 0. They use that to control you. So you must just regurgitate what they give you. If you challenge it, they will penalize you. I challenged it. And I said, I will give you proof. And I went to bat with my professors. And them said, boy, we don't agree with what you're saying, but we can't refute it. So I got an A. And I learned I must challenge all things. So I challenged the monetary system. I challenged the political system. I challenged the way they look at how they've killed us in school. They made maths and English our primary subject. That's foolishness. Maths and English is not your primary subject. Your primary subject is first understanding you. If you don't know who you are, if you don't understand this God-given mind of yours, your mind, understand your personality type, what makes you tick, how do you function, understand the beauty of building a character that allows you to stand up to all tests that may come to you, that you can be ethical and moral even if they throw you in the lion's den or threaten to burn you at the stake. You must develop a character of steel. You must have a mind that is not driven by the wind and tossed about by every new ideas that come up. You must be able to hold firm to principle. And when you have that, you are a man, you are a woman. Then from there, you must now learn about people and understand human behavior and human dynamics. That's how you're going to have a good family. My wife and I celebrate 30 years of marriage on the 14th of this month. Not because I learned all of this thing before, but because I continue to try to learn. And she too. You need to be able to build solid relationships with your parents, with your siblings, with your spouse, with friends, with business partners, and with people from other cultures and country. That way you don't allow your Christianity to prevent you from talking to the Muslim, or your Rastafarianism to prevent you from being able to deal with people who don't understand your faith. You become interfaith in your thinking while still holding fast to what you decide that you want to hold fast to. But you don't become obnoxious and rude and unable to work with them. So you need to learn human behavior and human relationships. But most importantly, on top of these two things, you must understand money because it is 50% of every transaction. If you don't understand money, they will trick you with debt and destroy you. If you don't understand money, you will not be prepared for your retirement years. If you don't understand money, you won't be able to advise your children properly, and you will destroy them with wrong money concepts and ideas. So you need to understand and know money. Those are the 3 core subjects. Now, math help you with that. So math is an adjacent subject. And English help you because communication is important, or whatever other language you're learning. But those are complementary. They must not be primary. And then now you must see the other subject areas in an interdisciplinary way, not physics by itself, or chemistry by itself, or biology by itself, or geography by itself, or history. You must see history and geography and biology and chemistry and physics mix up in a one, so you understand the pulls and pushes and the economics behind them. What caused the war? What were the real underpinnings of this war or that war? Who were the key players? What technology did they use to win the war? Where did that technology come from? How did it evolve? What's the economics behind it all? And when you can see the interplays of all of these things, nobody can fool you. Mr. Chair, back to you.
Why Jamaica? Waste no more time because them are meds, yeah.
Powerful.
Solid. Solid med. Boy, it's better you sit down and you hear things like that more than you hear about a man's personal life of him vigor and vitality. Now, what Jamaica really needs is these kind of meds that we're hearing tonight. Spoken like a true leader, Mr. Patterson. Very well said. Very right. Anyone else want to throw anything in? Anything else?
I just want to support Mr. Patterson and everything that he's just said, because that exact same mindset is exactly what we're working on here in Barbados, and we have the exact same challenges here in Barbados as you have in Jamaica, boss man. And the most important thing for all of us who understand the absolute requirement of unity for the Caribbean region is by understanding the challenges in each one of our sovereign national territories, so that we can take these principal constructs and implement them regionally, so that our entire Caribbean region becomes a sovereign national region of prosperity, character, and the ability to contribute to the global economy in ways never before seen.
Absolutely.
That's all I have for this evening. So,
and I want to see that extended to Africa and then to the world. Can
absolutely.
you imagine? We have these fake leaders who have been trying to spread so-called democracy around the world, and those who have also been trying to spread communism around the world. But what we need to spread around the world is the appreciation for individual sovereignty and our collective sovereignty. We want to spread around the world the idea that every man is supposed to be free, every woman is supposed to be free, and that government is not our God.
No.
Government is not our parent. We're not its children. Government is a facilitator. Government must provide public goods and services so we can provide for ourselves the private goods and services we need. When government does its role well, here's what happened. You have a safe environment where your life is protected from scoundrels who want to use force and fraud to deny you of your life. Your liberty is protected from scoundrels who want to deny you of your liberty and your freedom to choose what is best for you and your family. Where scoundrels are denied the opportunity to steal your property. And you have a clean environment, a beautiful environment. All the public spaces are well manicured and well cared for. Our forestry is well cared for so that it continues to regenerate and give us fresh, clean water instead of being mined out by bauxite and poisoned by bauxite. Our schools are places of learning where children don't learn to be confused about their gender or to be confused about the relationship between a man and a woman, but instead understand how to build decent, loving, caring families that really reflects what our Creator wanted to be reflected in us as human beings. Where we have a society where we have parks and markets and communal spaces that we can all enjoy in common, where people learn to appreciate the differences and not be afraid of our differences, whether it be color or whether it be customs that we have in our different cultures. I can appreciate the Indian man or woman with their unique culture, the African man from Ghana versus the African man from Nigeria, the European from the Netherlands versus the one in Australia, the Aboriginals of Australia, the Aboriginals in Northern Canada, the Inuits. Understanding and appreciating that diversity is fine. It's okay for us to be different. It's okay for us to speak different languages if we want, to have different customs, but we must all obey the one common law to respect the life, liberty, and property rights of every man upon this earth. And that no government, no authority has the power, has the responsibility, have the duty, have the audacity to seek to infringe using force or fraud upon anyone's life, anyone's liberty, or anyone's property.
Amen.
I think that's a fitting note to end our program tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, everyone, Ms. Carrie Ann Walker, Fred Corbin, Dr. Michael Harvey, and Claudette. Thank you so much, everyone. Well, join us again next week, Saturday, same time.
Thank you.
Same
Take
issues.
care, everyone. All the best.
Have a good
Thanks
one.
again.
Night,
Bye-bye.
night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.